The Ruy Lopez opening begins with the moves e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5. This classic opening is widely played at all levels of chess. Today we'll uncover some common traps and tactical tricks that can help you gain an early advantage and secure a quick win. Let's get started. In this position, black's most natural move is pawn to a6, forcing white's bishop back to a4. Next, black plays pawn to b5, pushing the bishop back to b3. At this point, black can either castle or continue development with pawn to d6, which serves multiple purposes. It opens up the light square bishop, allowing it to become more active. It reinforces the pawn on a5, ensuring stability. It creates a positional threat, as central control is crucial in the Ruy Lopez. In this opening, white's light square bishop is a key piece, exerting strong influence along the diagonal. In some cases, it can be repositioned to d5 in the future if the opportunity arises. Compared to this, white dark square bishop is currently less active, but white's light square bishop plays a crucial role in white's strategy. Once black's pawn on e5 is defended, the knight on c6 is free to jump to a5, aiming to trade white's light square bishop. Since this positional threat is present, white must secure an escape path for the bishop on b3, which can be done comfortably by playing pawn to c3. This move serves multiple purposes. If black plays knight to a5, white's bishop can easily retreat. It follows white's main strategic plan of preparing pawn to d4, gaining central control. Now, if black castles, white might feel ready to push pawn to d4, but typically, white plays pawn to h3 first. This move prevents black's light square bishop from coming to g4 and pinning the knight on f3, ensuring white retains flexibility in the position. White cannot immediately push pawn to d4 because after bishop to g4, the knight on f3 becomes pinned, creating an annoying pressure point. Additionally, black's bishop and potentially other pieces can increase pressure on white's pawn on e4. Since black also has the option to trade white's knight on f3, this pin can be frustrating to deal with. Although this is not a decisive problem for white, it does give black additional attacking possibilities. To prevent this, instead of rushing pawn to d4, white plays a preparatory move, pawn to h3. This stops black's bishop from coming to g4, ensuring that white can safely play pawn to d4 on the next move without interference. At this point, black has several options, but if black simply plays a normal developing move, such as bishop to b7, white is now fully prepared and proceeds with pawn to d4, seizing central control. White has successfully established dominance in the center, building a strong pawn structure. We can say that white has won the battle for central control and is now ready to transition into an attacking position. For this reason, black's main objective is to contest the center as effectively as possible. One of the key variations is the Steinitz defense deferred, where black plays knight to a5, attacking white's light square bishop. Since this bishop is a valuable piece, white does not want to trade it and retreats to c2. At this point, black reveals their true plan by playing pawn to c5, aiming to challenge white's center control. However, since white has carefully prepared pawn to d4, it is now the right time to push it forward. With this move, white fully achieves their strategic goal, reinforcing central dominance and preparing for further active play. You can take a moment to celebrate. You've successfully established central control, gaining a positional advantage. In addition to this, white is now attacking black's pawn on e5 twice, which forces black to respond. At this point, black must decide how to handle the challenge in the center. Will black trade pawns on d4, or will black try to defend the pawn on e5? In most cases, black chooses to defend the pawn on e5 rather than exchanging in the center. If black trades on d4, white can recapture, and this actually benefits white. White's knight on f3 can then advance forward, potentially jumping to e5 or even c6 in the future if black's knight on a5 moves away. This would give white even more activity and attacking chances. White now has the opportunity to develop the knight from b1 to c3 naturally, as there is no longer a pawn blocking its path. Overall, white's position looks more active, while black's knight on a5 appears misplaced on the edge of the board. This is why trading pawns on d4 does not solve black's problems. Instead, black usually chooses to defend the pawn on e5 rather than exchanging. One common way to do this is by playing queen to c7. Black could also defend with knight to c6, but this would allow white to gain an extra tempo by pushing pawn to a5, attacking the knight and forcing it to move. To avoid giving white this advantage, black prefers queen to c7, which is the main line. This sequence might seem a bit complicated at first, but understanding the logic behind each move will help you grasp the deeper strategy of the position. Instead of memorizing a series of random moves, it's important to understand the logic behind each move, why it is played, and why it is considered the best option in the position. Now, let's move to the next phase of the game. White has successfully completed the first step, developing pieces and gaining central control. The next objective is to transition into an attack, ideally targeting Black's king on the king side. However, before launching an attack, White needs to bring more pieces into play. Currently, the knight on b1 and the rook on a1 are still inactive. While the bishop on c1 has not moved yet, it is already well placed along its diagonal, ready to be developed when needed. White's next task is to activate these remaining pieces to build up pressure and prepare for a strong offensive. White doesn't need to worry about the bishop on c1 too much, as it is already well placed along its diagonal. However, the knight on b1 is currently passive and needs to be developed. Since it cannot move forward to c3, as that square is occupied by a pawn, White instead plays knight to d2, preparing a maneuver to relocate it to g3. At first, the knight on d2 stands somewhat awkwardly, as it blocks both the queen and the dark square bishop. Meanwhile, Black continues development with a move like bishop to d7. White then follows up with knight to f1, appearing to retreat, but in reality, setting up the final stage of the maneuver. If Black plays a move like rook to e8, centralizing the rook, White completes the plan by moving the knight to g3. This is a key square for the knight, from which it can potentially jump to f5, putting pressure on Black's position. Alternatively, White's other knight may also reach f5 via h4 in certain cases. At this point, White's position is highly active. The bishop on c1 can now be developed to g5, adding further pressure to Black's setup, and White is well prepared to launch an attack. If White wants to, the knight on g3 can jump to f5 at some point, increasing pressure on Black's position. And since White has more space and better maneuvering opportunities, it becomes easier to shift pieces toward the king side and develop an attack. Another useful move to remember is pawn to a4. If White ever feels that the rook on a1 is inactive, playing pawn to a4 can open the a-file, allowing the rook to become more active and contribute to the position. Now, what should White do about the center? Should White trade pawns on e5 or push pawn to d5? The best strategy is usually to maintain the pressure for as long as it remains comfortable. We already know that if Black captures on d4, White can simply recapture without any trouble. Since Black must constantly defend the pawn on e5, this creates a persistent problem for Black, forcing them to always be cautious and react to White's central control. If White ever feels uncomfortable with the central pressure, there's always a way to handle it. For example, if Black plays knight to c6 and White feels the pressure on the pawn on e5 is becoming too much, White can push pawn to d5. This move not only gains a tempo by attacking the knight on c6, but it also expands White's space advantage on the queen side. After pawn to d5, Black's knight has limited options. If it moves back to a5, it becomes passive. If it retreats to d8, it's not much more useful there either, as the squares are blocked. Moving the knight to b8 is another option, but it's still quite passive, as the knight cannot advance anymore. By pushing pawn to d5, White not only gains more space, but also opens up more possibilities to develop the attack in the future. The added space advantage allows White to maneuver more freely and apply increasing pressure on Black. Thanks for watching.